Louis Gaspard on OPAM 2 and the state of the OCaml platform.
Okay, so yes, I'm going to present all the new stuff that there is in OPAM 2, also what has changed, and now a little bit of what's going on with the OCaml platform. So this is a talk that I prepared with Anil, and is, well, I work at OCaml Pro on OPAM. The platform is a lot of work by the OCaml labs, and most of this is funded by Jane Street, so thanks to them. So I don't think there is need to present OPAM here anymore. So this is a project which I developed at OCaml Pro. It was formerly handled by Thomas Gazanger. I took it 2 years ago with lots of support from OCaml Labs. And the package repository, which is the big part of what makes it useful, is handled by the community with lots of people here and there reviewing and merging and submitting packages, obviously. One word on the license, which has been changed. Actually, we had the license bug, so now it's the same license as OCaml. Last version of OPAM is 1.2, and it mainly brought an advanced pinning feature, which allowed very nice workflows to create new packages and test packages easily, and that was really well adopted, and people liked it very much. But soon what happened is that big users were using it so much that they started to find limitations with it. Namely, you can pin one package in one local switch in your repository, but it's not easy to share or to propagate your local definitions. The API could be improved, and also Microsoft Windows support wasn't quite there. So actually I just released a preview of OPAM 2.0, which you can, well, there's the link for the announcement with some documentation, there's an updated manual, and you can already try it. Please do, if you have Wi-Fi. So the highlights of this new version is that there are no more compiler definitions. Compilers are normal packages. OCaml is a normal package. You can have local switches anywhere you want on your disk. Command wrappers, installed files by package are tracked and can be properly cleaned up when you remove the package. There's better error mitigation. So I'll go through some of these highlights and give an overview of the new features. I won't go into the detail of all of them because there's absolutely no time for that. Then I will explain some changes that that were needed for these and that might lead to incompatible things, so you should be aware of them. And then there will be a few words on what's going on in the platform. So removing compiler definition files was the decision. Well, just to summarize, a switch, what we call a switch in OPAM, is just a local sandbox which has its own prefix with bin, lib, etc., and its own set of installed packages. And in previous releases of OPAM, you needed a compiler definition to create a switch, and the switch was always based on a specific OCaml version. So right now, these are two completely different things, and you can just create an empty switch or install whatever package you want as the compiler in your switch. So the two are now separate. The motivation to do that was that it duplicated code. It didn't allow easily to use Coq as your compiler or to do more custom compilers. It was kind of specific to OCaml, and it added some duplication, and we had two kind of things to manage in the repository. For signing it would have been more difficult and so on. But this has quite a few consequences. So to make the change possible, some extensions had to be added to the package definitions, which is actually a good thing. The repository is easier to read and it now has a flat layout. And the interface to create switch had to be a bit changed because you don't create a switch now from a compiler definition anymore. So the new uses that this made possible are changing your compiler on the fly, resetting it using custom compilers, testing branches of OCaml for compiler hackers is much easier than before. Internally, a switch is just the prefix plus 4 sets of packages. So the first set is what was before the compiler, it's the base package. So these packages are fixed. You won't be allowed to remove them, they won't be affected by upgrade. Then there are packages that you explicitly asked OPAM to install. These are the roots, packages that were installed, but because they were needed for dependencies, so you don't really care, but they're needed. And then the packages you have pinned to specific version, and you may have overwritten their definition or only have a local definition for them. And last but not least, you can now configure package repositories specifically for each switch. So if someone says, oh, I have this new software on this repository that you might test, you don't have to affect your global installation just to try that. You can do it in a specific switch. You can now create switches locally in any directory you want, so that's useful, for example, to have a switch just for one project. So you can, when you create a switch, instead of giving it a name, you can just specify a directory, and the switch contents will be created below that directory, so in an _OPAM subdirectory. And here 403.0 specifies the version of the compiler you want in your new switch. And what happens then is that whenever your working directory is below the directory corresponding to the switch, OPAM will automatically select it. There's one pitfall though, is that OPAM will automatically select it, but if you call OCaml compiler directly by hand, you will still need to update your path, so you still have to run eval of OPAM config env to update your path, or use the to be released OPAM manager, which has some wrappers to handle this for you, so that any command will always use the currently selected switch as expected by OPAM. So this can be very convenient when you have many switches to sort them a little bit on your disk. You can also symlink switches if you want to share them between projects, although I'm not sure that's a good idea. As I will explain later, there are lots of new features that are kind of atomic in this new preview release, and I am now expecting feedback about all of them. Lots of new workflows, lots of new exciting stuff should be possible, but we need to define it, and then we will refine this workflow, maybe add some little bits, but all the atoms should be there, and define the workflow, and then we may have a release. So I'm waiting to see what people will want to do with this. And we will add sugar to that later. So another completely different feature is the ability to define wrappers that will affect all the commands that are run by package scripts. So either build, install, remove, and you can have wrappers before, after, and well, real wrappers or hooks actually. But this wrapper can really change how your packages work locally, and lots of interesting stuff is possible, like building in containers, or generating a cache of pre-built binaries. I use it to control the file access, to be sure that when I compile a package, it only writes to its build directory, and when I install it, it won't write whenever on my disk, but only within the prefix. So that's useful for CI. We probably want that to check that packages don't do weird stuff. So this can be configured globally in your OPAM or just for one switch. And you can even define configuration files so that if you want to have them on a whole lot of machines, you just have to put one config file, and then when you do OPAM init, they will be set up already. So there are many more new features that I won't have time to describe in detail. So error mitigation is much better. Well, it kind of happens sometimes in OPAM 1.2 that you did an OPAM upgrade, then some package failed to build and all your packages ended up removed. So now there are measures taken so that we remove packages as late as possible. So generally when this happens, no package has been removed yet, and even if they have, you have a command to recover them without having to search through, oh, what did I have installed before? More external solvers are supported, so I heard they are still trouble with external solvers, so OPAM really requires one to be installed. So the current one is recommended one is ASP-queued. So more are solved. I hope we can find a nice solution for everyone for this. The API has been really reorganized, and it's much more modular, so it would be now much nicer to write extensions or plugins or tools relying on OPAM. The query CLI is much improved. So I mentioned already file tracking. Now there's improved internal stuff for locking and loading the states. You can define variables finally to affect your switches or your installation. You have a command to build a package in place. So if you are in a source directory, you can build directly within this directory instead of just within a temporary build directory mirror inside of .opam. So for some workflows, that can be quite useful, I think. There is no OCaml specific code anymore, so you could use OPAM for mostly anything. Well, there are actually, that's right, there are the migration from older version still relies on OCaml, and the initial configuration has some OCaml specific, because when you do OPAM init, you expect the OCaml OPAM repository to be used, but that's easy to overwrite. So the OPAM file have quite a few extensions, but I won't have time to go through all of them. Well, maybe the conditional or unparameterized dependencies is the most useful one. When you have dependencies, you can now have them only active according to some conditions. So here, when the OS is Linux, you will have this dependency, but not otherwise. And the equals version, well, version is a self-reference as written above. So it means you depend on package foo at the same version as the currently defined package. So that can avoid a boilerplate. And so I think that can be quite useful, and it wasn't possible before. So for migrating the current OCaml package repository, a few changes were needed. That's kind of tricky, so I want to say a few words about how it works. So we had plenty of OCaml compilers, so now there are 3 different packages. So these are exclusive, you can only have one of them. So the normal releases of the OCaml compiler are named OCaml base compiler with version, for example, 4.03 or the .0. The OCaml system is just the equivalent to the previous system compiler. So it's a wrapper that will rely on a pre-existing version of OCaml on your system. So that's quick to install. But then if you change your system, you will have to upgrade your switch. And variants are all the other versions, like the patched versions or development version, 4.023 plus FP. for example. And now there is on top of that no CAML package, which is actually virtual, relies on any of them, has the matching version, so that if you have variant 4023 plus FP, OCaml will actually be version 4023, so you can have a package depending on OCaml 4023. So now when a package has a dependency on a specific OCaml version, instead of having the available version, available field depending on some variables internally defined, you just have a dependency on OCaml and the version. And it defines a few useful variables that were otherwise globally defined by specific code in OPAM, like whether native DIN link is available and stuff like that. There is the OPAM admin tool handles the migration of the repository automatically. There is even an option to create a mirror. So if you have existing repositories, you can just create a mirror to have the OPAM 2 version redirected to it. So that shouldn't be too troublesome. But still the format is different. So if you try to use OPAM 2 with an older repository, it will complain that variable OCaml version is not defined usually, because that's no longer defined. It was specific to OCaml. So what's coming, but not there yet in the preview release, so is, as I mentioned, more tuned UI for the workflows that will be defined. Better Windows support, there's lots of work being done on that by David Alsop and Fabrice Lefesson-Tout on a different direction, but it's not merged yet. That should arrive soon. End-to-end signing, you just have to wait for 1 hour to have some more details on that, so I won't explain more, but it should interact. It won't be built in the OPAM 2 release, but we'll have the hooks so that it starts to be possible, and we can experiment with it. Generations of software bundles is a useful feature that has been asked for, but not quite there yet. I'll pass on the provides field. It would improve the metadata expressivity, but it's quite complex. So now what we're expecting to do is gather feedback on this preview during October, to then during November try to define the new workflows we want to support, define the interfaces we want for them, and do some documentation so that we can be ready for a beta release in December. And then hopefully OPAM 2.0 should be released around January. So we will be already gathering feedback on the bug tracker as usual, and I created a dedicated wiki page just to describe the workflows that are made possible by, and try to see exactly pinpoint what we need for the new release. So about the matrix and what happened since last year on OPAM, well, we have now more than 1,300 packages, so the increase is still being linear, which is quite nice. Whether you look at the number of packages, number of package versions, or number of contributors, it's a steady growth, so that's cool. And we have around 250,000 package installs every month, and that's just what's downloaded from our server, so all the company private repositories are not counted. Now let's have a few words on the, yes?
Ask a question. Is it true that there will be also per switch repositories in the new version?
Yeah. This is already there. You can define the repositories differently in different switches in the priority order that you want. So Daniel Bunsley has been working on OPKG, which gives some guidelines on how to write your package, which makes interesting stuff possible on gathering information on all packages and creating it in an automated way. And this allows to generate documentation, so it's still a bit experimental, but we expect to have a global documentation tool soon. It's already used for the, so do I have network? For the Mirage stuff. So there are a few commands already to generate a website with all your documentation. That's what you could see if it worked. The cross-referencing stuff between packages is experimental, but it's coming.
No CSS.
Yeah, well, let's go back. Now, just an example of the workflows we will define. One common workflow that I've been asked for about is npm-like. So it means you have a package, you get the source, and you just build your universe inside the sandbox within the project to be able to build your project there. So this is possible, but maybe not quite convenient with the preview release as it is now. So that's how you could do it, and we'll try to see exactly what we need, what's missing, and put some sugar on that. So here you just clone a project, then you can create a local switch in this project, // with some compiler version. Then you have to pin your project to the current directory, so probably we wouldn't want to need to be as explicit. And then if you install your project with in-place build, it will just install all the dependencies normally, then build your project in its source directory. So that's basically what npm would do. So you have a local OPAM switch with all the dependencies, but you compile your project directly, following the instructions in the OPAM file, but in the source directory, so the artifacts are easier to browse. Last, I want to mention some auxiliary tools that revolve around OPAM and that can be quite useful. So you may know OPAM Publish, which makes it very easy to submit new packages as pull requests to the OPAM repository. OPAM user setup is kind of new and not many people know about it, but basically when you set up a new machine, you install OPAM, you want your editors to have the Merlin, OCP indent, maybe OCP index and stuff like that working, and that can be bothersome. So what OPAM user setup does is help you configure all your editors. It won't mess with your configuration file without your consent, and it can be reversed, so don't worry. And it's quite clever regarding, well, if you have OCP indent installed in a different switch, it can still use it, but it won't mix Merlin between different switches because that wouldn't be compatible. So that's quite useful. OPAM Manager isn't released yet, but it's from OCaml Pro and should come soon. And it creates wrappers for all your commands so that they're automatically selected from the right switch. So it resolves the need to run eval of OPAM config env all the time. With OPAM Manager, you don't need to do that. If you call OCaml, you can trust that it will be called from your current switch. Camelus is the annoying bot that will bug you when you submit pull requests on OPAM repository with errors or warnings you might have in your package definition. There is also the weather service done by the ERIL that checks global consistency of the package repository. Finally, yeah, this is quite different, but it relies on OPAM. It's a service that was built to bench the flambda branch, and it's actually kind of stale now, but it still works, and we should update it to test the new branches of the compiler. If you are interested, come and talk to me, because I think it can still be very useful, and it just needs a little bit of work to be made up to date. So that's it. Thank you.
Any questions?
Can you tell more about software bundles? How do you plan to implement them?
Well, these, it has not been decided yet. So we can discuss it afterwards. The question was, what about software bundles and how we intend to do them? So it's, yeah, there are different plans. We have some precise ideas, but I haven't decided yet on them. Probably, once the release is done, we can do them with a plugin or tool that works over OPAM and maybe not built in OPAM. That shouldn't be needed.
So the OPAM API lets you build it very easily. So at Docker we have a bunch of scripts that automatically pull all the dependencies and give us standalone archive for our releases. So and Jane Street has something similar as well with a different mechanism. So the OPAM API lets you build all of these very easily, especially in OPAM.
Any other questions?
When you showed the example with this switch in the local directory, you have to specify a compiler version, but that seems strange if you have compilers as packages. I mean, what if I use not OCaml, but OCaml?
Yeah, well, that kind of a trick to be compatible. Well, actually, you're supposed to specify a package, but if you specify just the version, it will look in the repository for all packages that have the compiler flag set and the corresponding version.
Gabriel?
Time for a last question. My question is more maybe for admin or the people that maintain the OPAM repository. I know you are not the OPAM full hacker. My question is, do you scale? Last year, Fabrice and Grégoire, for example, started helping you. Do you need more help maintaining OPAM repository, or is it fine?
Yeah, so what we've been doing, we have 8 maintainers of OPAM repository now, and the backlog has been slowly growing, but not badly. But we have a lot more CI. So we have, right now we test 8 different Linux distributions. Like everything from CentOS to OpenSUSE to Red Hat to Debian to Ubuntu, Alpine Linux as well. And we're adding in Windows and OS X and FreeBSD soon into the CI pool. So the big push next year will be adding Windows support to OPAM repository. As soon as we upstream things, so Microsoft has been very helpful with getting Windows as well, thanks to John Pertenko and Sami Ishtak. So we could really use help on other operating systems, especially on Windows. So if there's any people who are passionate about Windows and build systems,